Good morning, everybody. Welcome again to day 2 of ATX Game Makers. I want to welcome everybody here and thank you again for sharing your time with us. Just to give a brief overview of what ATX Game Makers is, in case we got a couple of new faces, see some new faces in the audience. ATX Game Makers is an organization that I founded, and we help increase the diversity in the games industry by way of mentoring, resume reviews, portfolio reviews, anything and everything to get you into the games industry. Today, our first speaker, we have 2 speakers. So we have Parker from Ava Labs. He is behind, their company is behind the Avalanche blockchain, which is the next iteration of blockchain based off of the Nakamoto consensus. And then we also have Alex Wykoff, when you can sneeze. He paid me $5 to say that. He is with product from WRST Collabs. WRST Collabs, right? Okay, so I always go in between WRST and WRST Collabs. And so today, they will be telling us about the future of gaming.
Thanks, Donald.
Thank you. So, everybody can hear me okay? We're good? All right, awesome. Yeah, my job in this case is not so much to be the speaker, but more just to keep the conversation flowing. And Parker here is the one with all the ideas, so I'll just try and tease him out with a handful of questions as time goes on. We got that first intro to Ava Labs there. Maybe you could go in a little bit more about what does it mean to digitize the world's assets? And what's been the major pushes that Ava Labs has been doing to make that happen on Avalanche?
Yeah, so this will hopefully tailwind into what gaming is, but consider money and fiat currency and how everything is becoming on your mobile phone, right? It's all becoming digitized into the App Store. And so the first iteration of digitizing assets, I think, comes from Bitcoin digitizing what we know today as modern currency. It's instead of being physical, it's being digitized, and it is now just accessible in your phone, on your computer. So fast forward 10, maybe-ish years since Bitcoin's discovery in 2009, we've started to press the envelope of what it means to digitize assets. And so for today's conversation, I think it's not so much digitizing game assets, they're already digital, but for our mantra at Ava Labs, we want to digitize all of the world's real-world assets. So think of real estate, putting those onto the blockchain, being able to have immutable, identifiable assets that are all distributed on the blockchain ledger. You're able to know who owned the house before you, have all the history. That's one example. I think ticketing and loyalty programs are something that are starting to get more of a tailwind behind it, especially with Starbucks' most recent success. I think they've been seeing a decent uptrend in what their loyalty program is and what using the blockchain actually unlocks for loyalty. And then there's a lot of other things that allow for digitizing them into a blockchain-based asset. But let's kind of tail this into what gaming is. So I don't necessarily think Satoshi Nakamoto, back when he discovered Bitcoin, was necessarily building the future of digital assets. But because of what blockchain allows for, you can individualize all of these in-game assets and make them immutable from one another. So my in-game skin on Fortnite, let's say they adopt blockchain technology. That is my, it's not yours, it's immutable, it's got code behind it to back that. And if I want to trade that individualized skin to somebody, I can do so. And I think that's what it means to digitize the world of gaming assets. And there's a lot more we can talk about, but yeah, that's kind of a lengthy intro into that.
No, but that's really, I think, a good start, right? When we think about the evolution of gaming, I might roll back the clock a little bit further. And let's go all the way back to sheep knuckles, right? That's where we kind of see the very first games, right? As the Kingdom of Lydia, they take sheep knuckles, they turn them into different dice and whatnot, and that's how you get your first gaming assets.
Yep.
And those things were physical. You either had them or you didn't. And we can roll all the way forward to Parker Brothers and then your games at home. How many of you all have had a board game where you lost a critical piece of the game because you were playing around with it so much and the edges of your box get all busted up and you had to use masking tape and whatnot to kind of hold that box together, right? Sometimes you literally couldn't play the game you wanted to play because those assets get lost, right? You're a rambunctious kid or whatnot, and like you use a game piece for something else, and then you're substituting in like random buttons or like whatever you found in like the laundry to like try and make up the difference, right? In a digital asset world, you don't necessarily have that kind of a problem, right? It's all on your computer. And so we started to see video games, right? Like you had your ColecoVision, your Atari, Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and all that forward. You had the start of game ownership, right? You had the game console, you had the cartridge, and so because you owned it, you could play it whenever you wanted. There wasn't a way for somebody to like turn off the power and like stop you from playing, other than like maybe like your parents if you're like didn't do your homework, right? As we move to online gaming, though, this is where we start to see a shift, and I was thinking maybe you could take it from there.
Yeah. So I think the evolution comes from hardware, right, and the evolution of software. So we went from hardware to software. So we had to pay for these games in order to play them because of the capital cost of these game manufacturers to actually make the hardware. So the consumer would then have to be obligated to purchase the game in order for these game studios to see an ROI. Fast forward into the mobile era and just the online era, there were still pay-to-play models just because that's what the traditional game industry knew. But we realized, in walks Candy Crush, right? And there's a whole new revolution of gaming because of their ability to create such an addicting in-game loop that people actually wanted to pay to play more and accelerate their gameplay. And I think that their ability to monetize a free-to-play game was pretty revolutionary. And I think it all comes down to the technology behind it, right? Because it was only software that was required to ship the game product, they could ship it for free and acquire users through marketing. Instead of having to spend that money on building the hardware, they spent it on marketing costs. Get all these users into your game, create a very addicting loop, and then people will just essentially pay to play it. And so I think, progress even further, we've gotten to pretty legit consoles and people build their own PCs, and we have competitive gaming now, which is great. I remember watching Rocket League, I think back in 2016 during college, and I was staying in West Texas out in Odessa, and it was a terrible summer because nobody wants to be out in Odessa all summer. No offense if you're from there, but I remember the people I was staying with, I was watching a stream of Rocket League, very early days of Twitch. It might have still been Justin TV back then, I don't remember. But they were like, why would you ever watch someone play video games? And I just kind of irked me, gave me a little ick, and I was like, well, I'm doing it right now, so I don't know what you're talking about. But I think when it comes to competitive games, there is a flex factor that's associated to that. You're good, and you want to show it off, but then there's more than one way to show off, like, being good at a game. You also have these in-game assets that reflect, like, oh, this guy climbed the ladder board. He was able to reach the final tier of the battle pass this season and unlocked this in-game skin. And I think that concept in and of itself is why we're slowly going to evolve into the adoption of blockchain gaming because of these flex factors that we call them right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an interesting history when it comes to online gaming as well and digital assets, where we see, where people have paid money to participate and play these games online, but the value of that is locked inside of the game itself, and it's not actually has a transferability outside of the game. It doesn't even have a formal marketplace. So the case in point that I really like to go to is Ultima Online. A lot of you who are from this area, you know about Ultima Online probably, and probably know about that little castle that's out in Westlake Hills. And for those of you who don't know, it was one of these first kind of like online games. It was a role-playing game where you could put in this effort and you could accumulate this loot and this value for your character. But then once you've maxed out, you kind of don't know what to do with that character, right? And so folks started to go online and like email each other back and forth and say like, hey, who wants to buy my character? I'll sell it to you. And they would do like real world trades for like cash money to get these, right? And then with Blizzard, you saw that a ton with Diablo, right? Like all the entire Diablo franchise, as well as World of Warcraft and this kind of stuff, right? But I think what we're starting to see, and you could probably confirm this, is when it comes to blockchain-based gaming, you actually now start to have a formalized marketplace. And like the idea of ownership and transferability of assets completely changes because you're building on top of the blockchain rather than building on top of a centralized database and a centralized system that only the game maker owns.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I don't even know if there's much to add there, except from growing up, all of my friends are very familiar with navigating these gray markets from like RuneScape, World of Warcraft, and it's not like new for people to buy and trade their in-game skins and assets. It's been something that has been happening for, I guess, maybe 20 years. I don't know how long it was since RuneScape came out, but it's been a while. And so I think where we're at today, you know, fast forward, we have, and I think we talked about this last time, is Roblox is probably like the largest gray market in the world right now for gaming, because these kids have all these in-game assets and they want to get rid of them because they recognize there's value, and they're actually having to go to these gray market areas with illicit content that's also being shared alongside the assets they're trying to trade. And you know, as a parent, do I want my kids to be seeing all that? Probably not. I'm not a parent, but if I was, maybe you can attest to that. I wouldn't want that. And also, there's also a questionability of, do I want my kids to trade assets at all? Like, I don't know what the answer is, but I would definitely want them to be doing it in at least a safe manner if they're going to do it. And so I think that's what blockchain will really allow for, is the individualized trading of those assets. And yeah, I think that kind of hit it on the head there.
So, one thing that I think we wanted to touch on, just to kind of like cap this, is to kind of tell the rest of that story about that evolution of the interplay between ownership and playership, and like where have we seen the blockchain lead things, right? We had a couple of paths that we've taken. Maybe you could kind of explain now, like where you were talking about the gray markets, right? How did we evolve from there in the blockchain specific spaces?
Yeah, so I had a little script written out, and it basically took a couple steps back from where we are today, which was back during the 2021 like crypto bull market. I joined Avalabs early 2022. On the gaming team specifically. So I saw a lot of pitch decks, a lot of not so great pitch decks. But in late 2021, if you slapped a pitch deck together, put one cool graphic of a game and said play to earn at the top, you could raise maybe $5 million. I don't know why I'm sitting here. I should have capitalized on that. But that was just how the market was. It was pretty ridiculous looking back. But what we realized with games like Axie Infinity, who I think was kind of the Nokia era for blockchain gaming, right? That you had the phone, you had things you could do on the phone, but it wasn't quite that. And I think they built something pretty cool, right? Despite the fact that it was unsustainable, not the best gameplay loop, they actually did the first thing in gaming, which was they individualized each of these in-game Axie characters and showed that they were owned by the individual. So while the play-to-earn model was somewhat of a boom and bust, they did push the envelope forward for what it meant to own your in-game assets. And so, fast forward a couple years, a lot more pretty bad pitch decks later, I think we've started to see a really big uptrend in quality over just sheer Ponzonomics. And I think what we see now is the actual individualized ownership of these games. So Shrapnel is a game that comes to my mind, and I'm a little biased because they are building on an Avalanche blockchain, or an Avalanche subnet, but I think they've really hit the nail on the head with respect to what they are using the blockchain for. So if you're familiar with Escape from Tarkov, it's an extraction-based shooter. So all these assets that you own, you jump into a world or an event, and you go in, you interact with other players, whether they're good or bad. That's kind of up for you to decide. Size them up. If you think you can kill them, that's probably what you should do. All of their items that they go into the game with are NFTs, I guess is what you would call them. I've been trying to stay away from utilizing that term because it's kind of just cringe in the industry now, and gamers don't like it. But all of these digital assets are owned by the individual, and so if you die with them, the other player gets to loot you, take those assets, and then if they are able to extract them out of the map, they get to keep those. And it's a high stakes type of gameplay, and I think that's really what we're going to see the blockchain gravitate towards as it evolves. I don't know if that'll be the iPhone moment necessarily, But I think something that hits all those points of asset ownership, being able to know whose loot you just took, I think will be very interesting. Like knowing I just killed Shroud or Summit or Ninja and like took their loot, it's like there's a big flex factor there, and it's all shown on the immutable digital ledger. One other thing that I think is pretty revolutionary for blockchain gaming specifically is user-generated content. So one thing that I'm sure that you guys here at WRST understand is what art will do for the industry and what artists can do now with NFTs and actually be able to get royalties on their art after they're sold post-market. That can also be done through user-generated content. And so for Shrapnel specifically, they provide a toolkit for players to build maps and have a map creator mode. I think back in my childhood, I think I was in 6th grade, I probably spent most of my evenings playing and building maps on Halo 3 in their Foundry mode or Forge mode. But I was 12, so I didn't make any cool maps, but there are some people that made some pretty cool maps, but they actually never saw any fruits of that labor. There was no royalties tied to that. But now with Shrapnel and what they're doing with user-generated content, you can spin up your own map through their Unreal Engine add-in, and these creators can actually see the fruits of that labor. So I think there's going to be a whole new market that evolves from user-generated content and blockchain.
That was like a whole lot to digest. I'm gonna try and say that one more time, just in a handful of highlights. So definitely the shift from play to earn to play to own. But what I'm also hearing is maybe a secondary narrative, which is it's create and play and own, where you're not just leaving the creation of the game and the expression of the game itself up to the studio and the designers and the engineers, but you're actually having a hand in that creative experience as well. And I think we do see some examples of that, right? I mean, Gabe Newell was here in town a decade ago, talking over at the LBJ library. Sorry, I had to get those letters right. And at that time, making hats was the thing. And so it was funny. I asked him, why are people making hats? Are they doing it for the intrinsic motivation or the extrinsic motivation? What's it? Are they doing it because it's fun, or are they doing it because it makes money? And he's like, a little bit of both. And that was before the blockchain, right? And what that meant was, if Gabe, for whatever reason, would be like, I'm shutting down Valve and we're going away forever, all that effort from those folks would have vaporized. And we've seen that with other online games, right, where they would shut down. Who remembers when Halo shut down the last server, and there was those last few players that were leaving their Xboxes on and would refuse to turn them off just to keep that sucker alive, right? But once it was turned off, that was it, right? With the blockchain, we see a different opportunity where that can persist, right? And that's not an operational cost that a studio has to hold on to. That's a shared effort because it's a peer-to-peer network, right? But yeah, create and play and own really feels like a different thing entirely, right? And so even though Gabe and them were talking about it a decade ago, I think we're starting to see it realized because this technology allows for that honest to goodness ownership aspect of it.
Yeah, I think the creator economy, even without the blockchain, is going to be massive. And I think when you add in the ability to create a royalty-based system or a token-gated community system, I think the blockchain adds just an extra layer of oomph behind what the creator economy is trending towards. But yeah, create, what did you say? Create, play, and own. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to coin that. So, but yeah, exactly.
So one of the questions that we were kind of talking about before we hopped up on stage here is why haven't the large studios dove headfirst into this, and why don't we see a ton of blockchain games just flooding the market right now? What's your take on that? And then we'll kind of dive further from there.
Sure. Yeah, it's just like with you can think of it as an investment, right? These companies, these individuals, these gaming studios have to take a risk. They have to invest their time, energy, and capital into developing a game. And I think what we've seen since the dawn of investments, right, is there's people that are more risk adverse and they, will back off. But there's some people that just, they thrive in it and they want to take on that, risk. And so these game studios that are willing to take that risk, I think will do it, and they'll be on the early adopters end of the S curve. And if that does take off, these later staged institutions, think of like governments, right? They're always the latest stage of an institution to actually adopt a process because they don't have the room to make risk. And so slowly but surely, the building blocks will start to stack up with people that are going to jump on and take that risk. And so I think the individuals like the studio at Shrapnel that are just going full-fledged, like into blockchain, Web3 gaming, when they succeed, one more person will be like, okay, well, I'll try that, and then they'll jump in, and then, slowly but surely, we'll have the Epic Games of the world, the Sonys, the Microsofts, they'll jump in because then they're able to take on that risk. And I think that's really, really what needs to happen is we just have a few more months until I think some of these pretty legit AAA games will come out, and it'll slowly push these I guess, scared or risk-adverse institutions towards actually building some full-fledged games on the blockchain.
Excellent. Yeah. One other thing that comes to mind is also like a pattern that I've seen repeat with like new platforms as they've come out over time. So I remember when the Xbox 360 came out, they're like, oh, we've got this whole indie dev channel where like you have all these indie games and you can like pop in this little marketplace, $1 to $2, you can pick up all these different games. And so you could have this massive library of indie games that are made, right? And then over time, Xbox kind of like faded that out, and the more AAA titles came in, right? And so like the marketplace was there, but not as loud, right? And the same thing actually happened with Netflix, right? You had a lot of indie filmmakers show up, and they were creating a lot of films, and you'd see these really wacky student films that would never get published anywhere else, but they were showing up for their online option as Netflix was making that shift away from DVDs into online streaming, right? Here's another opportunity I'm seeing where there's a platform that is available, it's open for people to participate in. You can like literally read the documents and figure out how to like participate, right? Tons of tutorial videos, tons of workshops, and yet the one fundamental difference here is that there's no centralized algorithm to shift that's going to kind of take you out from the knees for the fact that you put in this effort. Like your effort is in and it persists, right? That seems like to me one clear fundamental difference. Like why is this a big deal? Why are we talking about this when we've seen this pattern repeated in centralized systems? Maybe one of these key advantages is the fact that it's decentralized, and you can persistently have this marketplace that will support indie creators.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the reason that it hasn't been adopted, though, is just because of the lack of just infrastructure, right? Like these marketplaces. There are some, but they're not great. I think we need just actual, like I mentioned earlier, like an actual iPhone moment where something big happens, where it makes sense, where nobody can just look at it and say, no, that's it's hogwash. I can't actually do that. I think there just has to be a moment in time where it just clicks, and I think we'll see that in the next few years. But I think gamers are also inherently lazy. I'm a gamer, so I can say that. But if I'm gonna play a game, I don't want to have to do 20 different things in order to play it. I don't want to have to currently download a MetaMask and memorize a 12-word seed phrase just to be able to get into the game. I want to log in with an email and password. I want to be able to trade my assets on an in-game marketplace such as the Steam store. And it's just, frankly, I'm not going to play a game if I have 20 steps to do it. And so making a completely seamless experience is where I think we're lacking, and where I think, like you said, these indie developers are okay with navigating because the ROI is there for them. And so that's really why indie developers are always the first to a market, because they're able to just take on that risk, like I said. But yeah, I don't think anyone's trying to keep the indie gamers out. I think it just hasn't evolved yet.
So there are a couple of things to push on there. One is, of course, we've seen a little bit of action from Hyperplay in terms of creating a marketplace and a situation for people to get published, big or small. That seems to be opening up a little bit. 4 months ago on the podcast, when we were downstairs in the podcast studio, you talked about we're kind of in a building phase when it comes to all this. I'm curious, do you still feel like it's a building phase? And if so, how much longer do you see us building versus, getting into the post-building phase? Or does it ever end?
Sure. I mean, not financial advice, of course, but I think we're slowly ending this, where we were in the bear market and slowly seeing some actual games come to market. And I think that the worst experience for me was talking to seeing all these really cool pitch decks last year early on and being like, wow, this is great. I'm new to the game industry, and so I was like, all right, when does this go live? And they would say, Q3 of 2023, and I would do the math. I said, it's like 16 months from now, and they're like, yeah. I was like, that's how long games take to make. And so yes, when we talked 4 months ago, a lot of those teams were still, raising capital. We're still building, integrating their game onto the blockchain, finding these infrastructure partners in order to make a seamless experience for their end users. And I would say, in my honest opinion, Q3 and Q4 this year will have at least 10 games that I can tell my friends, like, hey, these are games you should play. Right now, it's like, hey, here's some games that use blockchain technology. But once I'm at a point where I can tell my friends to download a game and they'll play it, and we'll have that, one more game type of mentality and stay up late, that's where I think we'll be here in about half a year to a year with a few of the games in the pipeline. So super excited about that. Finalizing the building phase, but yeah, we're almost done with it.
Excellent. Yeah, that was, I think, a core question for me getting up on the stage today is like, is gaming, Web3 gaming or blockchain-based gaming here, or is it on the way? I was the good fortune of being at ETH Denver like 2 weeks ago, and they had a whole floor section dedicated to gaming. And so just to rattle off some names, I saw Knights of Degen, Trollin Worlds, World Wide Web, Axie was there, Zenin Shutdown, Tearing Spaces, right? There was like just a ton of different games that were like live, ready. You could straight up sign in and use them. Some of them only required an email, which is amazing. And so they were trying to like abstract away the complexity of this blockchain, work. I was starting to feel like maybe it's here. And so it's interesting. We got two different opinions that maybe blockchain gaming is here, maybe it's a few months away, but it really seems like, if anything, maybe to split the difference, it's close, and a lot closer than we were even 2 years ago, and certainly closer than 4 months ago.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's just from my perspective, like I see some of the things that are to come, and that's what I want the industry to look like. And while there are things that are here today, and I think it's only going to get better, I see that, you wrote down our announcement with TSM, right? We're slowly starting to build the narrative and push the envelope that Web3 gaming is legit. And TSM's actually building out their own blockchain, which is kind of what Avalanche allows for these institutions and studios to do, is build out their own layer 1 blockchain. And TSM's doing this with their coaching app, Blitz. And so these players will be able to have their own individualized achievements, their rankings. They'll be able to trade assets with players from one game to another. That hasn't been fully fleshed out yet, but it's coming, and I think that's when we're really going to see this Web3 gaming is here moment. So,
excellent. The last question that I had was just thinking back on like ROI incentives and how do we kind of like help people get excited. So, there's Ludum Dare, there's Global Game Jam, there's like these different events where folks who are like building, like they get incentivized to like make something really quickly, right? And to participate and to hopefully have like a playable game by the end of a weekend or a long week. I'm curious about, is there anything in the pipeline from an Avalabs perspective of incentivizing building, and especially as it relates to gaming?
Nothing I can concretely share, but we did just hire out and acquire like a full DevRel team, and so Luigi's gonna hurt me for mentioning it, but I think from the gaming side, it'd be great to collaborate with our developer relations team to have like gaming hackathons, right, where these developers are building cool games on Avalanche, but they're leveraging our team and our resources to help them do so. As far as incentives go, I think leveraging our time and giving our expert industry experience from a developer perspective, from a business development perspective, to these college individuals or even post-college that just want to build things. I think that's pretty invaluable, and these individuals feel the love when we're there at these events and we're coaching them and we're writing their pitch decks and giving them feedback. I think that's really where the incentive comes from. And so hoping to push some things on that front this year, but nothing too concrete yet.
Excellent. That's all I had for you, Parker. Thank you so much for letting me bug you.
For sure. Likewise.
All right, do we have any questions? All right. You guys are gonna have to share that mic.
Hello, hello. Hi, I'm Ethan. Nice to meet you.
What's up, Ethan?
Oh my God. So when it comes to blockchain games, the first thing I think of is, like you mentioned before, like the Steam page. So, you know, like in Team Fortress 2, there's a lot of trading of those assets of different weapons, of everything that with its certain names and everything like that, which is great. But to me, I feel like those only exist because they have really good communities, right? And they're really developed, they're really passionate, and it's constantly ongoing. And so it makes me think, what initiatives do you plan on taking to try and build a great community to then be incentivized to do all that trading and stuff like that during blockchain games?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think any market comes from, you know, obviously you have to have a buyer and a seller, and you can't have a buyer and a seller without, you know, a community around whatever that asset is you're buying and selling. It's actually a good question because from our side, you know, we're a software platform, right? We've provided a blockchain to anybody who wants to build on it. And so a lot of teams will say, how can you help us build a community? And I'm usually cognitive bias because, of course, helping them build the community is valuable for us because we want people to use our technology. But at the end of the day, we are a software provider, and so it really comes down to the game that's being built and the game team around it to build a game that has a very good game design and gameplay loop so that players just want to jump in and play. I think it really comes down to the actual gameplay and content. So while I want to do my best to help market and help you actually integrate your game into the blockchain, it's tough to say whether or not we can help build communities. I think it comes down to the pure vibe of the game that's being developed. So yeah, it's a good question, but I think it's tough to answer that from the blockchain provider's perspective.
Anyone else? You got a question? Oh, got one. Bring it back.
If CJ Peters here, Console Kings, if NFTs is such a tarnished word, right? You know, it's like the rotten apple. What can we use in place of that word to still distinguish that this is an asset that is super powered, you know?
Yeah, so someone mentioned this a while back, back when you'd buy an MP3, right? And then everybody was saying MP3 so much, MP3, and I kind of analogize that with NFT. You know, eventually, people just said music, and they didn't say MP3. They just were like, I'm listening to music. I don't know if there's really a word for it. I think it'll just evolve to a point where it's just a digital asset. It's just an in-game cosmetic. You know, music was different file formats back then, and it still has always just been music. So I think it's just going to come from just the adoption of it. I don't think there's an actual terminology that will push the envelope further, whether just time will kind of allow it to happen.
All right, we got one more.
So I'm playing your game, and I've created an asset, and I want to burn it to the blockchain. Who bears that cost, the user or the platform?
So you're a content creator who has just developed a map, and you want to mint that as a asset on the chain. Yeah, so it can actually be done either way, and it depends on the game developer who is running who created the ability for you to create the asset. Usually it's on the end user to be able to mint that because there is a gas payment requirement in order for the validators of the network to actually be incentivized to say, hey, this asset was created, and they all have to say together, yes, this asset was created. And in order for them to work and to reach that consensus, there has to be an economic incentive for them to do so. And it's usually on the end user that's creating that asset. But there are actual ways for the developer to burden that cost. So I don't know where the industry will evolve towards. Right now, it is the end user, though.
So let's say your platform is using Polygon because it's cheap right now, but down the line, you've got lots of people using Polygon and it gets expensive. and then is it possible then to take all of those assets and port them over to a new coin?
Yes, so that happens all the time, actually. With respect to Polygon and layer 2s, I kind of see them as, being a midway point to a layer 3 and a layer 4 and so on and so forth. As each of these chains get congested, it's just how their architecture works. And so with Avalanche, we actually allow each team and project to spin up their own blockchain called a subnet, and we allow this, and we want to grow to a point where we are a WordPress for blockchains. So if you're an enterprise, a government, a game studio, you can just insert in your customized, what you're wanting out of your blockchain, whether it's high speed, high throughput, more secure, more decentralized, whatever you want, we'll allow you to enter that in and essentially spin that up in a matter of minutes. And so to answer your question, because of that ability and what we're building with AWM, which is our Avalanche Warp Messaging, you'll be able to port your assets over in a very seamless manner. And it's already available, actually, so you can do that now.
And one last question, I'm sure everybody's thinking, do Avalanche bank at Silicon Valley?
Damn.
I am not allowed to answer that. No, we are okay. We are okay. But thanks for asking.
So I want to piggyback off his question about these gas fees. I'm somebody I'm from the old school world of Xbox Live, PlayStation. I create assets, I put them in the store, people buy them, I make money, and my whole business is that, right? But now I got to pay all these gas fees to sell my items. Like, how do we become gasless? And is that the actual race, right? Which company can become gasless and have a fun game, right? Got to have a fun game. And is that company that wins that race, are they going to actually set the trend?
Yeah, so there's actually two answers there. One is yes, I don't think users want to pay gas. Two, we are actually currently looking for solutions like that, and there have actually already been done. I can point you to a couple of different subnets that are building a gasless experience. With that said, and I'm going to keep talking about subnets because I think that's what my manager want me to do here. But no, from a gaming perspective, what these subnets allow for is you can have your own custom gas, right? And so you are a gamer and you're purchasing an asset in the game. So let's go to Fortnite. You're buying V-Bucks to buy your skins. The gas that you would actually be burning on a Fortnite blockchain would be V-Bucks because of how we allow you to have these custom gas rules. So I think from a user experience, that's okay. I don't think users want to have to go through the process of buying Ethereum or Avalanche or Polygon, all these other gas tokens. They want to buy their in-game token and use that throughout their whole experience. And so that's why I think subnets actually have a very good value proposition for the end consumer. But I still do agree. I think gasless is going to be where we trend towards. But in the middle phase where we're at now, I think in-game gas with your currency is the solution. Yeah.
Front load, so if I'm a developer, I say, hey, put this in my costs. I need 1 billion gas quantities. Give it to that blockchain and let my user base siphon that. And then hopefully that'll generate more money, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of different takes on this, and I just wanted to dovetail because there's like, one thing is, we talk about gas. If y'all haven't heard about gas, we're not talking about gas you put in your car. What we're really saying is transaction fee, and the reason I wanted to talk about like why that exists, right? So transaction fees exist on these blockchains largely as an anti-spam measure. It's so that you don't put out a bunch of false transactions. You're incentivized to not do that. If you put out a bad transaction, then that value in the transaction fee gets burned up. So who's going to spend $1 to be a jerk and spam transactions that are fake, right? Similarly, I think the reason why that transaction fee exists in terms of creation of on-chain assets is the same thing, right? Like you don't want to copy and paste a bunch of orange, red, blue hats for your character, right? And so it's an anti-spam measure. So the alternative as an anti-spam measure is reputation. So if you want to talk about being gasless, maybe the way to think about it is, how can we have a trade-off on this, reputation idea, right? So you're not going to blow up your reputation and spam a bunch of garbage, right? But it takes time to build up that reputation in the first place. So I personally foresee a thing where, like, you may be paying early when you don't have much of a reputation built, but as your reputation is established, we could see that fee taper down, right? Because you've built up rep and you're not going to be spamming the network with a bunch of garbage. I see a little bit of a tap on the watch from Donald here, so I'm thinking that's probably the last question.
Indeed it is. I definitely want to thank you guys for coming out and speaking with us about Web3 and the Avalanche blockchain. Clearly, there's some folks in the audience that y'all might want to go and have some extended conversations with. But I also want to present each of you with an ATX Game Makers Book of Talent. And so that was created by our community, and what that represents is, in case you guys don't know, is our community members came through, put together their portfolios after a portfolio and resume review. And so if you are needing to hire some young engineers, artists, UI, UX folks, I got you a book. That's awesome. All right on.
This is lovely. Thank you so much, Donald.
Thank you guys for your time. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Parker.
it.